All right. Good evening, everyone. Or good morning from David. I'm going to be a little bit more tethered today. I let my tablet's battery die. So I have to stick my laptop on this lectern up here, and I'm hoping I don't just run into it in the middle of class, because y'all know I'm pretty mobile. And I'm also not used to accounting for this thing being here. So here's hoping that my proprioceptive senses work for me and I don't clobber into the thing. All right, we are in Genesis chapter 6 tonight. Genesis chapter 6. Hey, so we've been in the book of Genesis for a little while now. And we just finished the first major section or unit of the book of Genesis. So between Genesis chapters 1 and 5, something kind of cool happens. The author bookends those sections. So in the beginning, God creates everything, right? And at the end of where we have Genesis chapter 1 set up, it ends with the creation of humankind. God created humankind. In his image, he created them. Man and woman, he created them. And then, last time we were together and we started that genealogy that's there in chapter 5, that genealogy that kind of reinforces the role that death is now playing in humanity because of the continued emphasis. But at the beginning of that, before it transitions us to the character of Noah, at the beginning of that, it restates that in the beginning, God created humanity. In his image, he created them. Man and woman, he created them. Sectioning off that first chunk of Genesis in those bookends that remind us that the story of humanity begins with image bearing, begins with goodness, begins with being blessed by God. And everything that happens in between those two bookend statements live in the context of that knowledge. From the creation of Adam out of the dirt, to the creation of Eve, to the naming of the animals, which happened first, but we'll just roll with it, to eating of the fruit, to the curses, to Cain and Abel. All of that happens inside this bookend of, hey, remember, God created you. God created you in his image. God blessed you. You are good. And that's an incredibly important thing to remember before we get into Genesis 6. Because it's going to be hard to find some good in here, but there is some. However, before we get to Genesis 6, I felt like there was something really important I let slip by when we were in Genesis 4. Conversation went a lot of places Sunday morning, but do you know the one place our conversation never went on Sunday morning? It's what I named the lesson after, and we never talked about it. And I want to take a second and talk about that before we get to Genesis 6. You didn't get a chance to see my notes from Sunday because I forgot to post them. Well, I posted them. I forgot to link them in the page that has all of the passages listed. So they were sitting there online, and no one knew how to get to them unless you figured out how I'm naming the URLs and could have guessed what came next. Hint, they're named numerically. But I named the lesson, Am I My Brother's Keeper? Am I my brother's keeper? And that question was so central to Genesis chapter 4. And I was like trying not to kick myself during the assembly after that because, I didn't want to be too distracted from what we were doing. But the second we were like 2 songs in and my brain went, we never got to that discussion point. I was like, but it's okay, because I'm just going to sermonize here for a couple of seconds. Am I my brother's keeper is the big picture of Genesis chapter 4. And if you're ever in a position where you're asking yourself, am I this person's keeper? Does God see me as responsible to any extent at all for this person's well-being? The answer is yes. When Cain said, am I my brother's keeper? The answer was yes. Now, there's this joke in journalism that 99% of the time you see a question in a headline. Is this the end of McDonald's as we know it? The answer is always no. Anytime you see a headline that's framed as a question, with very few exceptions, the answer is no. But in this case, Cain's question, am I my brother's keeper? The answer is yes. Time and again, sin happens in the Hebrew Bible because one person decides they have no obligation to someone else. David wrongs Bathsheba when he sees her as a potential conquest rather than someone he bears responsibility for. Ahab sins against Naboth when he decides a vineyard has more worth than his subject's life. Haman sins against the entire Jewish population of Persia when caring for his pride, when keeping his pride becomes more important than being a keeper of the people living in his land. The Pharisees wrong their flock when they stop seeing their position as having responsibility for the people who look up to them and begin seeing them as groups who are less than, people to be excluded rather than people who are their responsibility. No matter your position in relation to another person, you have an obligation to them. And it's more important than anything else you place value in. Your property, your citizenship, your rights, your convenience, or anything else that causes us to ask, am I my brother's keeper? Or, in New Testament vernacular, who's my neighbor? And now let's get to Genesis 6. Go ahead, John.
Cain's point of view, he was not looking at, in a sense, of what you're saying. He had hidden that body. He had buried that body after he had murdered his brother. He didn't want anybody to know that he had done anything to do that. He didn't want that body found. So that was a little bit different situation than about his keeping of his brother. You see what I'm saying?
But that's still at the root of it. Because at the end of the day, Cain's anger, Cain's pride became more important than his brother, and he neglected the obligations he had to the life of his brother. David.
A stamp, a rubber stamp on everything you just said when he told everybody what the second greatest commandment was.
Yeah, the second greatest commandment, love your neighbor as a distant relative, love your neighbor as an acquaintance, love your neighbor. Yeah, I hear some of you whispering it. That's fine. Love your neighbor as yourself. Care for others as yourself. And then what does he follow that up with? The parable of the Good Samaritan, where it is the outsider Samaritan who's the hero of the story and proves to be the neighbor to the guy who was lost. All right. Let's hop into Genesis 6. I'll read from here instead of my laptop. We're going to read all of Genesis 6. I'm going to warn you, my brain is all over the place tonight. So if you have like really weird, off-the-wall, out of left field questions from this chapter, I might just run with it because this is the chapter for it, y'all. Genesis chapter 6, this is the New English translation. When humankind began to multiply on the face of the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humankind were beautiful. Thus they took wives for themselves from any they chose. So the Lord said, my spirit will not remain in humankind indefinitely, since they are mortal. They will remain for 120 more years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also after this, while the sons of God were having sexual relations with the daughters of humankind who gave birth to their children. They were the mighty heroes of old, the famous men. But the Lord saw that the wickedness of humankind had become great on the earth. Every inclination of the thoughts of their minds was only on evil all the time. The Lord regretted that he had made humankind on earth, and he was highly offended. So the Lord said, I will wipe humankind, whom I have created, from the face of the earth. Everything, from humankind to animals, including creatures that move on the ground and birds of the air, for I regret that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the sight of the Lord. This is the account of Noah. Noah was a godly man. He was blameless among his contemporaries. He walked with God. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The earth was ruined in the sight of God. The earth was filled with violence. God saw the earth, and indeed it was ruined, for all living creatures on the earth were sinful. So God said to Noah, I have decided that all living creatures must die, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. Now I'm about to destroy them in the earth. Make for yourself an ark of cypress wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it with pitch inside and out. This is how you should make it. The ark is to be 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. Make a roof for the ark and finish it, leaving 18 inches from the top. Put a door in the side of the ark and make lower, middle, and upper decks. I am about to bring floodwaters on the earth to destroy from under the sky all the living creatures that have the breath of life in them. Everything that is on earth will die. But I will confirm my covenant with you. You will enter the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. You must bring into the ark 2 of every kind of living creature from all flesh, male and female, to keep them alive with you. Of the birds, after their kind. And of the cattle, after their kind. And of every creeping thing of the ground, after its kind, two of every kind, will come to you so you can keep them alive. And you must take for yourself every kind of food that is eaten and gather it together. It will be food for you and for them. And Noah did all that God commanded him. He did indeed. And this is God's word. All right, let's talk. What did you notice? What questions did you have in there? What connections did you make? What do you want to talk about tonight? Go ahead, Jordan.
How much this event compares with the event of Sodom and Gomorrah's destruction, where there's something that's gone up before God that is so disturbing, so evil, that he has to act. And like when Abraham was speaking to God, he's like, I will destroy it for X number of people, but he preserves the righteous that he sees there. In this case, we're seeing that similar situation happen, that God always sees the righteous, and he does not forget them.
All right, so what Jordan was just saying here was that he sees some parallels between this and what's going to happen with Sodom and Gomorrah. And incidentally, I don't think we're going to be reading through Sodom and Gomorrah in this quarter. We're going to get through Noah, skip into Job, and then skip over to Exodus. So, hey, we can talk about this because it's not part of the quarter. No spoilers for my own lessons in the future. But he's seeing a case where he's seeing a group of wickedness, that something is going up as offensive to God, but also that God sees the righteous there, that God sees those who need to be preserved. If I can go one further, way into the future of this, I can't help but think of the, which church was it? Was it Iconium in Revelation either 2 or 3, where Jesus has nothing nice to say about this congregation at all. And yet he says, but there are those among you whose robes are still unspotted. He always sees those who are staying faithful to him. So thanks, Jordan. That was a good noticing and good connection. Go ahead, John.
He has let pass 1,400 years before he makes this kind of decision.
Mm-hmm.
So this is something that he has been thinking about for a long time. And now he's coming and saying, well, I'm going to have to act.
Yeah, so John's talking about the fact that God's wrath, God's judgment does not come quickly. And he's working from Clark's commentary there, John is, and knows that there's a really big passage of time between Genesis 5, basically, and Genesis 6. There's a lot of time for humanity to either get worse or to course correct. God is always patient. And we'll see this pattern time and again, especially when we get to the prophets, where some of the prophets are warning about impending doom well over 100 years or more before that doom will come. God's giving them plenty of time for that to settle in people's hearts and change their hearts. And I was just talking with Brad and Deborah Brewer before this about like one of those times when we see a change of heart in God's people. It happens in the book of Numbers, the book that we're terribly unfair about. You know, we look at Numbers and we say, oh, it's God's people complaining for the entire wilderness wandering, and that's not true. We only have 2 years of the wilderness wandering recorded for us, which leaves 38 years of silence. You know what's probably going on in those 38 years? Absolutely nothing. Because the Old Testament tends to say nothing when things are going smoothly. It only cycles back in when the story gets interesting again. And when does the story get interesting? When things go south. And there's this break. Right before the bronze serpent, you get the last events of like the people complaining that God brought them out here to be destroyed, whatever. But then when the bronze serpent happens, something interesting happens. The serpents break out, people are dying, and they come to Moses and they say, intervene on our behalf with God so that we may not perish. Paraphrasing a little bit there. You know what changed? We're at the new generation by then. They've learned that time that God gave them. That generation has more trust in God than the previous. So why does God always have this huge amount of patience? You know, Peter will write that God is not slow considering his promises, but that he wants everyone to repent. He's patient. So this starts that precedent. This starts that precedent of a patient God who's waiting, who's giving us that chance to turn around. We think of God in the Old Testament as being quick to smite, partially because that's a fun word. But the number of instant smitings you could count on like one hand. For the most part, God waits. We have a God who waits. Thank you, John. Okay, David, thank you. Oh, you want to talk about the Nephilim? Yeah, what about them?
The translation I read said that it was giants. But another translation I read said it actually means fallen ones. So what are your thoughts on that?
Or it can just mean mighty ones. So David was asking about the Nephilim. So most of your translations are just going to stick the word Nephilim in there, and that's a transliteration. It's spelling out in English roughly how you would pronounce it. We have other transliterations in the Bible, like baptism, for example. It's a transliteration of the Greek baptismo. In the case of the Nephilim, the reason is because between Jewish rabbis and Christian scholars and translators, it's just tough to translate. Like, what are the Nephilim? Oh, well, they're the ancestors of the Canaanites, because of Numbers 13:34. No, they're not. Because all of these people died in the flood. They're not ancestors of anyone. Personally, whatever mythology had built up around the Nephilim is why I think the spies brought them up. They saw them as these great people, but there's no literal connection. My take on it is this idea of like, this was a time of heroes and greatness, but it's contrasted with what God saw. So you have this introduction of like, here are these like mythical heroes of old, right? Which could also be translated as fallen ones, but I think the text leans towards seeing them as these great mythical heroes, whoever they are. And the people look to them as heroes, but then immediately after we meet them, the text says, but all was ruined in God's sight. So we have what people thought the condition of the world was, where we're in a world of heroes right now. We're in an age of giants, maybe metaphorical, but we're in the age of greatness. But God sees something else. God sees a ruined world. And what we see as great, what we see as powerful, what we see as heroic, sometimes God sees as worthless. Does that help, David? Okay. If we have any Hebrew scholars in the audience tonight, feel free to chime in on the whole Nephilim thing. Go ahead, John.
There was the knowledge of Noah and knowing what he's doing they're talking with one another. They say, well, do you know what Noah's doing? You think that big thing he's building out there in the woods? Wonder what he's put together. That thing's big as a tree.
Yeah, and what's,
Those kind of
yeah. Yeah, so John is wondering about like what people thought when they were seeing Noah doing this. He's building this massive structure that looks a little bit impractical. John said it's as big as trees. The interesting thing here is that, at least in this passage, we get no insight into what's going on around Noah. We get that God says, build this ark, save these animals. Something I hadn't noticed before until tonight, but also save a bunch of plants. Save your family. And then it's just, Noah did it. I didn't write this passage down, though. Is it in Hebrews, or is it another passage when it speaks of Noah being a preacher or a prophet? Quick, homework. Who's got it? 2 Peter 2. Thank you. Oh, I should have known that off the top of my head. As soon as you said 2 Peter 2, my brain started filling in the rest of the passage. But you want to know a secret about being up here? My brain is strangely blank when I'm in front of all of you. That's why I have such copious notes. For those of you who are fans of older movies, I'm like Indy's dad in Indiana Jones: The Last Crusade. And Harrison Ford, asks Sean Connery, what, you don't know? And Sean Connery, playing his dad, being only about 5 to 10 years older than Harrison Ford, but okay, answers, that's why I wrote it down, so I don't have to remember. Yeah. But anyways, 2 Peter. Peter writes about how, like, Noah preached, basically. So I don't know if what he means is just like, by doing this, Noah was condemning those around and calling on them to repent, or if in the process, and I like to think it's the second one, this is my midrash of the chapter, that Noah was building and inviting, hey, this thing's going to happen. There's room for you on board. This thing's going to happen. Leave all this behind, and there's salvation to be found. Unfortunately, as we know, it turns out just being Noah's family in this. Thanks for the reference, Glenn. I appreciate it. Yeah, go ahead. Verse 9.
I don't know if it's ever stood out to anybody else. It says, these are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God, and then it tells the son's name. It never says his family was righteous. It just says Noah. That's always kind of stood out to me, that they were never punished error.
Yeah.
I just don't know, maybe they were able to go on because of Noah's righteousness.
Yeah, so God has this pattern. So I forgot your name. Kelly. That's right. You share a name with my niece. One of my nieces. Kelly was just asking about, in the middle of here, and I want to talk about this passage for a little bit here, once we talk about this. But this is the account of Noah. Noah's godly. Noah walks with God, which is a phrase we've seen exactly once before, by the way. But she noticed that didn't say anything about his sons in that righteousness. I don't think we can necessarily write off his family because Noah is the center of the story. But there's also this pattern where God chooses people. Not clans, not groups, people. Like my cousin Tim used to be fond of saying, God didn't choose the nation of Israel. He chose Abraham. And then he reiterated that chosenness with Isaac and Jacob. Sorry, in my head I had to go Abraham, Isaac, Jacob to be able to get to the names Isaac and Jacob. Right? God picks people. So regardless of where Noah's family was, Noah's family. I'm going to try really hard tonight not to say Moses on accident. I don't know about any of you, but sometimes Moses built the ark and Noah brought down the 10 Commandments, and I have no idea why that happens in my head. It's not like the Cain and Abel mix-up where I have a distinct history, a distinct memory in my head of why that mix-up happens. I don't know why my brain flips noses and Moa. That's it, guys. I'm going home. But, squirrel. Yeah, but God picks a person. I don't think that necessarily means the rest were unrighteous or anything like that. But the story is centered on Noah here, and Noah is who's important to this whole thing. Randy, thanks for waiting. Oh, no.
Something that kind of caught me kind of odd is the way that in our lives we view children.
Mm-hmm.
They reach an age of accountability, okay? And that means they can tell the difference between right and wrong. And here they were destroyed.
Building a big old boat like that. Where were the kids?
Welcome to one of the biggest questions I have in here. You know, and one of the questions I have throughout the book of Joshua in particular. Okay, so remind me your name. No? It was Randy? You made me think I got it wrong. Picard maneuver there. Okay. Why do children die? Yeah, but still. I think it's time for a whole podcast to sit down and have a discussion on this one. There are places, and it's uncommon. It's nowhere near as common as we try to make it, but they're prominent when it happens. That there are places in the Old Testament in particular where God allows children to die alongside their sinful parents. And that's a tough one. And I don't have a good answer for it. I can academicalize it, if that's even a word. I can provide academic arguments until the cows come home. But they all end up sounding kind of heartless. You know, it's like when we decide that suffering is always a consequence of sin, and we all deserve to suffer because we've all sinned. What does that mean for a 5-year-old who lost their legs in a minefield? Does that 5-year-old deserve that? Are they living in sin? Or have we made something so academic that we end up kind of heartless about it? All I can say is this. God preserves innocent children. And whatever the ending was, they're with God now. That doesn't always make it a lot easier, but at least that's the perspective I try to hold on to. That every one of those children involved in this are now with God. And Caleb, you had something.
Seeing that in the Bible, we can't justify, everything in our own mindset. Because I don't know how God does things, why He does things the way He does. I think we see like a positive example, like with Joseph. You see what he says at the end of Genesis 50 about, you meant it for evil. Well, if they would have had it their way, it wouldn't have turned out the way God had it turn out. And there's plenty of times throughout history where people did evil things and there were really evil results that happened. And so, like, there are just going to be situations where you see in Scripture that people die, and I think it's the preservation of the eternal soul is the most important thing, and we still just think of it in terms of, well, God's wrong for taking their physical life or whatever happened like that, but, you know, then what about the 10th plague? Why did he kill all those innocent, you know, little Egyptian children? And, you know, you can just go on and on and think about this, and it's just like, well, they were wicked, and wickedness leads to death, and sin leads to death. And I don't worry about how God preserves the innocent, because I know he's promised us he will. So I think us worrying about the physical fallout is something that can eventually lead to, like, well, you know what, if this is how he acts in this physical world, then yeah, I don't want to be part of that God, and we miss the greater importance of the spiritual preservation that he can do. And, you know, who's to say that, you know, looking at it the other way, if those children were preserved, then spiritually they may have been lost. And they, living in wickedness, and unbeknownst to them, they are just carried away by, you know, wickedness by their parents and just falling into the same pattern. Like all these people, when it talks about how all these people had evil intentions continuously. Well, what's going to lead to those evil intentions of the parents? Well, it's going to be picked up on by these children. And I know that doesn't mean people that have, you know, are surrounded by sin can't turn to righteousness. That's not what I'm saying. But I think it's just very dangerous for us to sit there and be like, man, I think God handled that wrong. He should have saved everybody that was of innocent age and mindset and preserved it, you know, Noah with a bunch of babies. It's just, I guess, like, it would kill me thinking about all the things if I was trying to correct God on how he handled it. So
Yeah.
I try not to think of it too much in the physical sense, but more in the how does he spiritually preserve those who are innocent, like you mentioned.
Yeah. So Caleb was reinforcing the idea of like
The spiritual preservation and the final destination of the soul in the end. And it can be very challenging to one's faith to think about these things. And there are people who have a hard time accepting God because of these kinds of things, because of seeing it more from that physical perspective. And I think we have to be sensitive to that perspective, because that then helps us build bridges when talking through these type of things. Like, yeah, from our perspective, this is tough. But right now, those kids have been in God's presence a lot longer than they were ever on the earth. Right. Yeah. And Jordan, go ahead.
Also concur that we should spend our time rationalizing, putting an academic spin on it. But what we should emphasize is God had every right and every ability to wipe out humankind when they betrayed, chose not to, and chose to endure and to send his own son to die for us. No matter what the explanation is, the character of God demonstrates that what he's doing is not cruel or evil.
Okay, so Jordan then wants to reorient the discussion
To then focusing on this idea of preservation. That instead of completely wiping out humanity entirely, God did choose to preserve us, eventually leading to sacrificing for us. That preservation is at the core. And the text kind of speaks to this too. Kelly brought up the chapter about Noah's righteousness. It's an interesting little passage because it's very small. It is between two big blocks. Bookends. Remember how we introduced class with bookends? Sometimes bookends can serve a couple different purposes. Bookends can serve to reorient everything that happened in between them, or it can point to the most important thing in the passage. And what we have here is mankind is evil, God resolves to destroy them, Noah is righteous, walks with God, God's going to preserve Noah, and then mankind is unrighteous, has ruined the earth, God resolves to destroy them. Destruction, salvation in the middle of it. Preservation. Here is the character we need to be paying attention to. This Noah. And the previous chapter, that genealogy told us Noah is who we're going to have to pay attention to here. Do you remember when we read through Genesis chapter 5? Other than Enoch, there's only one person that the genealogy gives the time of day to. And it's Noah. Right at the end, Genesis chapter 5. When Lamech had lived 182 years, I'm in verse 28, he had a son. He named him Noah, saying, "This one will bring us comfort from our labor and from the painful toil of our hands because of the ground that the Lord has cursed." Noah's the only person who in that chapter who gets a prophecy with his birth. And what's that prophecy? He is the comforter. He is the comforter. He will restore us from painful toil. This is messianic language, folks. His father says of him, this baby is a deliverer. And now we come into this story and we get to meet that deliverer and see the context he's living in and see how he remained faithful despite that context. The context isn't what's important. Everyone else's sin isn't what's important here. Noah staying faithful in spite of all of it is what's important. Noah is the point of hope. He's the example we should be latching on to. And like Enoch, he's described as walking with God. Go ahead, John. Oh, okay, cool. Uh-huh.
God took him at 365 years rather than going to live way out in the 900s like a lot of them did. But also, Enoch's son lived until the year of the flood.
All right, so Clark's commentary puts
Moses dying the same year as the flood, assuming that no generations got skipped in there, and assuming some other things. But yeah, so Enoch walked with God, he was taken up. Noah walked with God, and he was taken up above the floods. Cool, right? There's another cool thing that starts here with Noah. And Noah found favor in the eyes of God. This is the first time we see that phrase pop up. And Noah found favor. It is not going to be the last time y'all are going to see it in your Old Testament studies. Abraham found favor. Moses found favor. David found favor. Mary, mother of Jesus, found favor. And then also that language is all over the stories of Esther and Joseph, even though I don't think in either one of those it ever says they found favor with the Lord. I might be wrong about Joseph, but I know it doesn't ever pop up in Esther. But it keeps using that Hebrew phrase that's translated as found favor. Why? for us to see God's hand in their lives. Anytime from here on out in the Hebrew Bible that you see someone found favor, there's someone to pay attention to. They're going to be important. Yeah, Noah's been around for a bit before any of this happens, and he remained faithful. So then we go through the details of the ark. We go through the details of preservation. Plants, including animals. I don't know, I've read through this account more than once. I think this is, for some reason, my brain just finally latched on to the fact, hey, they're gathering plants too here. They're making provisions for the road. Yeah. Let's see, what else do I have in here? Oh, this is also important. Starting in verse 11, Genesis chapter 6. The earth was ruined in the sight of God. The earth was filled with violence. All living creatures were sinful. What we're seeing here is an uncreation. The chapter is using creation language here, but then flipping it around. Instead of the earth being made new, it is being ruined. It's decomposing. It's getting gross and icky. Instead of the earth being filled, being filled with that which is conducive to life, that which is good, instead the earth is filled with violence, that which is destructive. And tied in with that, instead of all things being good, all things are filled with sin. So we're taking this creation imagery here and we're turning it around. And what we're seeing is this decay of creation. Creation is coming apart. It is reverting to chaos, which is what we saw at the beginning of Genesis chapter 1. God took chaos and organized it into something good and conducive to life. And now everything, after all of these generations, is starting to unravel. Everything's unraveling. And so God decides to make a grand reset here. There's a grand reset through Noah. Go ahead, David. Thanks for waiting. Okay. Wow. The first bell already rang, man. Okay, so another one of those tricky spots to translate and make sense of what's going on. Right at the beginning, when humankind began to multiply on the face of the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humankind were beautiful. They took wives for themselves from any they chose. All right, I found three main interpretive thrusts on this. And I am not going to give preference to any of them. I'm just going to kind of tell you what I came across on this. And so some see this as an indication that divine beings were attracted to humanity and engaged in sexual relations with them. Some books that we view as non-canonical, like the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees, connect these to fallen angels. Who descended to earth, gave up their place in heaven because humans were so pretty. That's basically what it comes down to. They swiped right on us, y'all. In the book of Enoch specifically, these angels teach forbidden knowledge to humanity, which is part of the midrash of like why there's a grand reset here. Because God wants humanity to move forward without this forbidden knowledge. All right, so that's the book of Enoch. Number 2, I know that's the second bell. Others take the approach that the sons of God are godly people drawn to sin by the daughters of man, promiscuous women. All right. Related to this, some of those also see that those of God being those descended from Seth, those of man descended from Cain. My big issue with that one is that it places the entire guilt on the women, but it says that the men went and took wives. They were the ones doing the action. A third approach that some rabbis take is that they interpret sons of God as people who grew powerful and abused their power, taking multiple wives by force. This approach invites an examination of how power structures empower and encourage evil. And these people then in this story weren't godly, being sons of God, but rather they saw themselves as godlike and not accountable to anyone. And then that's where we land. And that's where we land for tonight with that lovely bit of uncertainty. We're going to be continuing in, I think, just chapter 7 next time. Is that right? Nope, 7 and 8. We're in 7 and 8 next time. Have a safe drive home, everyone.